lovely people, I'm Alanah, and welcome to my channel, where today we are talking about episode 8 of The Last of Us. I usually do a podcasty type discussion with different people every week. We're not going to do that for this episode because if you don't know, I do a podcast every week with Troy Baker, and I imagine that we will just spend the whole of that separate podcast talking about the show. That'll go up on Friday, so we'll just talk to Troy about it instead of doing a separate episode. I also feel weird doing this at all a little bit, where I've been giving impressions of every episode because Troy is a good friend of mine, and so much of this episode is me being very proud of Troy because I think he did a fantastic job. For anyone who doesn't know, he plays James. So I was like, how am I even gonna talk about this episode? Because I don't know how to separate myself from seeing Troy and thinking he did such a good job. So I'll do my best, but thought I would give that disclaimer to start with. So this episode, of course, set in a very iconic part of the game being David's cult. And I felt like what this episode needed to do to set up what's going to happen next episode, I didn't know if they'd be able to do it. And I am in the camp that they nailed it. I think this episode is very, very, very important in terms of setting up Joel and Ellie's relationship and how much they care about each other. Everything we see Ellie desperately doing for Joel here, completely believable. And then Joel at the end, obviously, unbelievably, to be honest, fighting back for her so that they are now much, much, much closer and have more sort of personal responsibility for one another than they did previously, which leads us to the finale and the decision that Joel is going to make. It still feels very soon. Really soon. It feels like this show should be way longer. I can't believe there's only one episode left, but I do think they covered a lot of important ground for Ellie's character and the relationship between those two characters in this particular episode. So not unlike other episodes, this episode is again about humanity and the bad people and what they do, which is common in zombie themes or zombie shows. It was still fun to watch here, especially because David is such a particular kind of creepy. At first, he's unsettling the way he takes the glove and he slaps the girl who's talking about burying her dad. And he's like, but you already have a father. And then his interactions with Ellie, why does he want to preserve her, don't really make any sense until they sort of touch hands at the end. And I read it in the show and in the game, though I don't know that it's that explicitly laid out here, as David being a cannibal pedophile, which is quite a combo, quite a monstrous man. And it's made even more disturbing by the fact that, there's the reveal that he used to be a teacher as well. He is a very potent kind of disgusting. And so I think seeing what Ellie ends up doing to him in the end, which is obviously very violent, is something that I wasn't uncomfortable seeing. Perspective is all on her, of course, and she obviously finds it traumatic, but for her foray into the most extreme violence we've seen her commit, I feel like they nailed exactly how that goes down and why it has to be David and the desperation of her situation regarding Joel. I also thought the conversation about the cordyceps and how he kind of respects it was super interesting because we rarely actually hear any kind of human take on the virus in the show. Not outside of the part of an early episode 2, I think it was, that featured the bit about Jakarta, or the bit in Jakarta, rather. Otherwise, we don't really get a lot of human input on how they feel about this virus that they're living with. And I don't remember if that was in the game. Like I said, I have been playing through the game every week on Twitch to line up with the episodes. So I'll catch up pretty soon because I haven't played it since it first came out. There are things I remember really distinctly, some things I don't remember so well, and I don't remember if he has that conversation about cordyceps, but I thought that was super interesting. And yeah, I liked his character a lot. Very, very creepy, unsettling, needed for everything that we had to cover at this point. And I think something about, that sort of diner burning down in the snow when she's in the warmth of shelter and in theory could have chosen to stay there and have food and some shelter in exchange for dealing with David is a very interesting decision. And I think that the exploration of that theme with David is something that I've touched on repeatedly, which is there's something about Ellie that, again, I've mentioned this a number of times over the last several weeks, about the way that young girls tend to respond to men they don't know. And that is very, very, very different to how Ellie interacts with Joel. If I were in Ellie's situation, the context of being a young girl, which I was many a year ago, I would be very polite and meek and cautious if I were willing to go on a journey with him alone at all. Ellie is not like that. And I wonder if, because of the way the QZ works and because of her Fedra training and because of the fact that they live in the areas they live in, it seems very unrealistic to me, but this is the way that I'm choosing to frame it, is that maybe that was her first encounter with somebody who would effectively be a sexual predator. That perhaps before this, Ellie had just never actually met somebody who behaved that way, and so thus wasn't aware that they could, and she's effectively seeing a different side of Joel's coin. Joel is painted repeatedly in this as being a really bad guy, which I'm not seeing that much, but that, violent past, etc. He certainly kills people to get where he means to go. And that's a very different kind of bad guy to a power-hungry cannibal pedophile. In terms of Joel's violence here, it's one of the first times that we really see it act out. The way he treats the two men who are hostages is a pretty big leap into the next episode of us realizing that he really will do anything for Ellie and disregard people in order to do so. Where previously we'd only heard that kind of notion spoken about but not seen. So I thought that that was really well placed where it was. Also a really interesting, in terms of the set here, the last time we'd seen a community that was loving, it was the little communist commune that is Jackson, where this time we were seeing very cold, very dictatorship cult-like community in the winter. Just seems like the perfect poetic right thing to do, to burn it to the ground. And across the board, once again, really beautifully shot. Feels a lot like a Western, which I think worked really well with Troy's character as well. It's so funny how sometimes he really just sounded like game Joel. I feel like I appreciated that. It definitely stands out though. But yeah, once again, excellently shot. Incredible production value across the board. Love the music, the tone, even things like the color grading. Just beautifully well made show. So I will say that I did definitely miss in this episode, which again keeps happening because I have the reference point, the part where David and Ellie are fighting off hordes together, and so you see them bond as well, and you see Ellie kind of get taken advantage of in the game, or at least that's how I pictured it. Effectively no infected in this episode. I definitely missed that scene, but I also completely understand why it was cut. I was just looking forward to that one, and how complex that made that mirror relationship with Ellie and David and Ellie and Joel. Felt a little bit like it was missing here, but again, I don't know if it's just that I have the expectation, and so I can't help but make the comparisons. And I do think overall the show is doing a really good job of it cuts certain things and it adds certain things back in ways that make a lot of sense. It feels very fresh, which is awesome. We don't know exactly what we're going to get, and I much prefer that than it be a one-to-one remake. And I feel like they nailed the thing that they had to nail, really, which was making sure that Ellie hits her absolute darkest moment, and showing how much these two characters would do for each other is the most important thing. And this was a great glimpse of that. Definitely still feels to me like where we're at right now in terms of there being just one episode left is too fast, and I would have liked another couple of episodes, I think, for Joel and Ellie's relationship, because it doesn't feel like it's made a ton of progress. Again, did big leaps in this particular episode in a way that I think was natural and handled really well. The desperation, it all makes sense. The incredibly dark backdrop of what's happening here all makes sense. But I just feel like it's it just feels too short. It just feels too short. And I guess we'll see how I feel about that next week. But now I still just keep feeling like things are moving along real quick. And otherwise, again, heading into just one more episode, I think the lack of infected is a little bit of a bummer. Would have liked to have seen them slightly more often in ways that are used to develop the characters, of course. Like with David and Ellie, I think that would have been nice to see. But hey, it's a very different show. I think seeing David and what he does also made me retroactively question Kathleen a little bit more. The Kathleen arc was my least favorite in the show so far. I didn't really feel like had a significant payoff. I wasn't a huge fan of everything that happened with Kathleen by the end. And I think having Kathleen early and having that evil sort of cultish leader just to have a second one who in theory should have been more important felt a little bit odd to me, I think. I definitely prefer David and would have preferred probably 2 episodes to focus on David than 2 episodes to focus on Kathleen. Personally, Though, of course, I loved everything that happened with Henry and Sam. But that is all I have to say this week. It's a weird one to do again because I thought Troy was so fantastic. I loved his character. I thought he did a good job. So I was just like so enthusiastic to watch him that it feels weird to even like try and remove him from the way I'm talking about this, which I'm doing my best at. I thought he was wonderful. And we'll talk about it more on Friday. But it's also because, again, it's 1 week before the finale. It's just kind of hard to say. This episode had to do a lot of work, and it's hard to even really talk about it without seeing the next one. So I'm very excited for next week. I wish we had a little bit more time with the show, but maybe that'll all be out the window next week. Who knows? Also very glad that the rabbit lived.